Hello there, fandoms of the world. My name is The Geek Theorist, and welcome to my review/analysis of RWBY Volume 4, Episode 4. There's quite a bit to talk about this week, so let's not waste any more time and get right into things. So the episode starts off with the unnamed farm boy from Episode 1 that we haven't seen since. We know very little about him at this point, which has left a lot up to speculation, but we do learn a bit more about him in this very short scene. During this scene, we see him approach a mirror, acting confused for some reason. Suddenly, we hear the familiar voice of Professor Ozpin, and the boy falls over in shock. The scene ends with some kind of female family figure calling for the boy, whose name is now revealed to be Oscar. Now, as I said before, despite the scene being only about a minute long, we gain a lot of information from the events and dialogue. For one, it appears that Ozpin is alive in some way, although this was pretty obvious before we received this confirmation. Second, we find out that Oscar is not living alone as it appeared in Episode 1, and that he does seem to have some kind of family. And finally, we find out his name. These three pieces of information are slowly giving us more and more of a picture of who this character is, though much is still unclear. I had previously speculated that he could be the Spring Maiden, which is still a possibility as Ozpin appears to have some kind of special interest in the boy. However, if he were the Spring Maiden, it stands to reason that he would already be familiar with Ozpin, as Oz is one of the people tasked with the protection of the four maidens. Though, if the previous Spring Maiden had passed away, it is possible that her powers were transferred to Oscar, but not her knowledge of Ozpin. There's a lot that is yet to be revealed, but this scene certainly gave us more information to think about. The next scene is back with Yang, standing in this kind of nightmarish landscape. She looks down to find she has both her arms again before she is approached by Adam. After firing off Ember Celica, her shots only phase through Adam's body, and she looks down again to see her missing arm, before waking up from her dream. I feel like this nightmare scene is important, especially when you look at it in comparison to how Yang acts later on in the episode. So we'll come back to it then. Also, I just want to briefly commend the art and animation team for how good this really brief scene of Yang waking up is. I know I can be quick to criticize RWBY for its flaws, but I also want to recognize when they get things right, and this scene is beautiful. Moving on, Yang heads downstairs towards the sound of voices, and is met with our old friends Professors Port and Oobleck, speaking with Taeyang. I'm choosing to kind of just skim over most of what goes on in this scene, because a lot of it is just dialogue, and I want to pick out the important parts. The first thing that I want to address is the difference between Yang's behavior here and the way she acts in her nightmare, as I mentioned before. After her father makes a particularly insensitive joke about her arm, it seems as though Yang is going to be upset, before she starts to laugh alongside him. There are two possibilities here. The first is that Yang is simply dealing with her trauma through humor, which is a very Yang thing to do. However, based on her nightmare, I believe the second option is more likely, which is that Yang is tired of people feeling sorry for her, and that she's shutting out her feelings as a result. We can see signs of this here, as it's clear from her nightmare that Yang is still experiencing emotional trauma from the loss of her arm, and yet she still laughs at Ty's joke. We see it later on, too. Yang chooses to put on her new arm, but seemingly only because she doesn't want to be a burden to her father. I'm not sure what to think of all this, if I'm being completely honest. On one hand, if the writers know what they're doing, then this is all intentional and will lead to a big emotional payoff when Yang realizes that her recovery has been for all the wrong reasons and that she hasn't truly been recovering at all. On the other hand, it's possible that the writers are simply making light of her depression and post-traumatic stress, which we can see in the way Professor Port calls it fear and compares it to being afraid of mice. Either way, I feel like the topic is something which needs to be handled with subtlety and tact, and at this point, it's unclear whether or not this will be the case, and only time will tell. Following this scene, we check back in with Team Ranger, making their way to the next town, and find out that Crow has been following them the whole time, taking out Grimm along the way and ensuring their safe journey. Team Ranger makes it to the town, and we find Crow sitting in a bar or inn of some sort, before he is delivered a drink from the woman upstairs with red eyes. Crow heads upstairs and we get our first real look at Raven. The two have a very ambiguous conversation, but we do learn some important details from their talk. 1. Raven is not aligned with Salem or Ozpin, but rather with some third faction, the Tribe, one which Crow is not a big fan of. 2. Raven is the leader of this faction. 3. Raven wants to know if Salem has gotten her hands on some kind of relic. And 4. Raven is still Mom of the Year and appears not to care all that much about Yang. This conversation provides a lot of interesting revelations, and while it's still kind of too early to really speculate on anything, I am very interested in seeing where Raven's role goes from here. So then, the episode ends with a short scene where Yang is shown with her new arm, ready to begin training to get back on her feet. I've already talked about what I think of Yang's spontaneous recovery, but again, I'm interested in seeing how the writers handle her character following this episode. Overall, this episode had a lot of interesting developments, and was perhaps the strongest episode this season. While I do have some mild complaints about how Yang and Taeyang's characters are being handled, I won't let nitpicking ruin my perception of an overall great episode. I would give this episode an A. Not quite perfect enough for an A+, but still very good. So what did you think of the episode? Be sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments and like and subscribe if you enjoyed. This has been The Geek Theorist. Until next time.